300 acres. That's it. 300 acres of central London. Not a tech empire, not an oil field, not a single factory, just land. And 3.5 centuries ago, it wasn't even good land, it was swamp. Muddy, waterlogged fields to the west of a much smaller London. Today, that same patch of ground is worth somewhere around £10 billion, and it belongs to a man most of Britain has never heard of. So here's the question. How does a family hold onto the most valuable real estate on earth for over 300 years, through wars, crashes, revolutions abroad, and tax raids at home, and quietly stay one of the richest dynasties in the country, whilst barely ever appearing in the headlines? What if I told you they didn't build this fortune, they married into it? That a 12-year-old heiress, a pile of useless fields, and one very clever wedding in 1677 created a wealth machine so well protected that even death, and the taxman, can barely lay a finger on it. This is the story of the Duke of Westminster's £10 billion property empire. And by the end, you'll never look at a London street name the same way again. To understand it, you have to go right back, not to a boardroom, to a wedding. The year is 1677. London is recovering from plague and the Great Fire, and a wealthy young baronet named Sir Thomas Grosvenor, a Cheshire man, old money, comfortable but not spectacular, marries a girl called Mary Davies. Mary is 12 years old. By the standards of the time, it's an arranged match, a contract between families. And the thing Mary brings to that marriage isn't a chest of gold. It's a deed, a piece of paper, the title to about 500 acres of land just outside the city walls. Now, at the time, nobody was jealous. This was the manor of Ebury, boggy, low-lying ground by the Thames. Good for grazing cattle, not much else. If you told a London gentleman in 1677 that those soggy meadows would one day be the most expensive square mile on the planet, he'd have laughed you out of the coffee house. But here's what the Grosvenors understood slowly, over generations, that almost nobody else did. London wasn't going to stay the same size. It was going to grow. And when a city grows, it has to grow into the fields on its edge. They didn't need to be geniuses. They just needed to own the right mud and refuse to sell it. Fast forward about 60 years. London is bursting at the seams. The rich want to escape the crowded, smoky old city, and they want somewhere fashionable to build grand townhouses. They look west, and there, waiting, are the Grosvenors' fields. So the family does something clever. They don't sell the land, not an inch of it. Instead, they lease it. They lay out elegant squares and streets, and they let wealthy tenants build magnificent houses on Grosvenor land, on long leases. That neighborhood becomes Mayfair. The squares you've heard of, Grosvenor Square, Belgrave Square, those aren't coincidences. That's the family name, stamped onto the map of London. Belgravia, Pimlico, great chunks of Mayfair, all of it laid out on what was once Mary Davies' swamp. And the genius is in that one decision. Lease, don't sell. Every grand house built on their land was, ultimately, still their land. The buildings might change hands for fortunes, but the ground underneath always came home to the Grosvenors. This is the engine of the whole empire, so let me make it simple. Imagine you build a beautiful house, but you don't own the ground it sits on, you only rent that ground, on a lease that might run 100 years or longer. You pay the landowner a ground rent, and when that lease finally runs out, the house, the land, all of it reverts back to the landowner, back to the family. For centuries, that's exactly how it worked across this estate. The Grosvenors weren't really landlords in the way you picture a landlord. They were something far more powerful. They owned the very ground beneath some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they let time itself do the earning. It's slow, it's patient, it's almost boring, and that's precisely why it survived when flashier fortunes burned out. You can't have a bad quarter when your business plan is measured in centuries. By the 1800s, the Grosvenors weren't just rich. They were establishment. And in 1874, Queen Victoria made the head of the family the very first Duke of Westminster. Now, that title matters. A dukedom is the highest rank of the nobility below the royal family itself. It put the Grosvenors at the very top table of British aristocracy, and it tied the family name forever to Westminster, the political heart of the nation. For a family whose entire wealth was built on London land, becoming the Duke of Westminster wasn't just an honor. It was branding, the most powerful address in Britain written into their name. But the empire was never only London. Out in Cheshire, the family had their ancestral seat, a vast estate called Eaton Hall, surrounded by something in the region of 11,000 acres of English countryside. This is the other half of the picture people miss. The Grosvenors are urban landlords and old-fashioned landed gentry. Farms, woodland, villages, the lot. While the Mayfair leases quietly generated the cash, the Cheshire estate gave the family what every great dynasty wants: roots. A seat, a place that says, "We were here long before you, and we'll be here long after." Now you might think a family sitting on land this valuable would just sit on it, collect the rents, go shooting at the weekend. Job done. But here's where it gets modern. Somewhere along the line, the Grosvenors stopped behaving purely like aristocrats and started behaving like a serious global business. The family fortune today runs through a property company called Grosvenor, and it doesn't just manage Mayfair. It develops and invests in real estate across Britain, across Europe, across North America, across Asia. Office towers, neighborhoods, food and agriculture ventures, even bets on new property technology. The muddy fields of 1677 became the seed capital for a genuinely international property operation. And if you want one example of that ambition on British soil, look at Liverpool. In the 2000s, Grosvenor took on something enormous, the redevelopment of a huge stretch of Liverpool city centre into a vast new shopping and leisure district known as Liverpool One. It opened in 2008. Dozens of acres of city rebuilt. Streets, shops, public spaces, one of the biggest developments of its kind the country had seen. Think about what that tells you. A family that started with grazing land outside London was now reshaping the centre of one of England's great cities, 300 years later. Same instinct, own the ground, shape what gets built on it, let the value compound, just on a national scale. Right, quick one. If you're enjoying this, and you're finding out things about who actually owns Britain that you genuinely didn't know, do me a favor. Hit that like button, and tell me in the comments which British street name near you turns out to be named after some long-dead aristocrat. I read them all. And subscribe, because we do these proper British Empire stories every single week. Right, back to it, because now we get to the part that really matters, the moment the whole thing was handed over. August 2016. The 6th Duke of Westminster, Gerald Grosvenor, dies suddenly of a heart attack. He was 64. By every account, a man who took the responsibility of the estate seriously, and who'd spent his life as one of the wealthiest people in the country. And the moment he died, an extraordinary question hung in the air. Who inherits one of the richest estates in Britain? And the question every ordinary family dreads when someone passes: what happens with the tax? Because in this country, when serious wealth passes from one generation to the next, there's a tax waiting, inheritance tax. And the headline rate is brutal, 40% on everything above the threshold. So a £10 billion estate changing hands, you'd expect a tax bill of, what, £3–4 billion? Enough to make even a duke wince. Except that's not quite what happened. The man who inherited was Gerald's only son, Hugh Grosvenor. And here's the detail that stunned people. Hugh was 25 years old. 25. Most people that age are worried about rent and a dodgy boiler. Hugh Grosvenor became the 7th Duke of Westminster and, overnight, one of the richest people in the entire country, and reportedly one of the wealthiest people under 30 anywhere in the world. He hadn't founded a company. He hadn't invented anything. He'd been born into the right family, and a wedding 340 years earlier had done the rest. And to be fair to the man, By all accounts, he's kept a remarkably low profile, taken the duties seriously, done charitable work, and avoided the scandal you might expect. He's even godfather to Prince George. This isn't a story about a villain, but the system he inherited. That's where it gets interesting. Here's what nobody tells you about how fortunes like this survive. That 40% inheritance tax, the one that can force ordinary families to sell the family home when a parent dies, it largely didn't land on Hugh Grosvenor the way it would land on you. Why? Because the bulk of the Grosvenor wealth isn't owned by any single person at all. It's held in trusts. Think about what a trust does. The land, the buildings, the company, they're not in one man's name, to be passed down and taxed each time someone dies. They sit inside a legal structure that holds the assets across the generations. The Duke benefits from that wealth. But because he doesn't personally own it outright in the way you own your house, the great 40% death tax doesn't bite the same way. It is completely legal. Let me be clear about that. Trusts are a normal, legitimate part of how estates are managed. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The tax system that can squeeze a middle-class family selling mum's house to pay the bill is the same system that the very largest fortunes are best equipped to plan around. The bigger the estate, the better the lawyers, the smoother the handover. That's the quiet engine underneath the headline. It was never just about owning the land. It was about holding it, protecting it, so that it passes down the bloodline century after century, barely interrupted. And we should be honest about what that £10 billion figure even means, because it's not a vault of cash. Nobody's swimming in coins. It's land, it's buildings, it's leases and ground and bricks, and the right to the rent on some of the most desirable addresses on the planet. It's deeply illiquid. You can't sell Mayfair on a Tuesday afternoon, but it is astonishingly durable. Stock markets crash, currencies wobble, companies vanish. But the land under Belgravia, it's been valuable for 300 years, and short of London itself disappearing, it'll be valuable for 300 more. That's the lesson the Grosvenors understood before almost anyone. Cash can be spent, shares can collapse, but they don't make any more central London. So step back for a second and look at the bigger picture, because this isn't really a story about one family, it's a story about Britain. We tend to think of wealth as something new, tech founders, hedge funds, overnight billionaires. But the oldest, deepest, most unshakable money in this country isn't new at all. It's land. It's the families who got hold of the right acres centuries ago and simply never let go. Walk through Mayfair or Belgravia today. The embassies, the billionaires' townhouses, the gleaming squares. Most of the people living in those houses, even the spectacularly rich ones, don't own the ground beneath their feet. A family does. The same family that took a marsh nobody wanted in 1677 and had the patience to wait 3 centuries for it to become priceless. And that's the real British lesson buried in this. Britain wasn't carved up yesterday. It was carved up long ago, quietly, legally, through marriages and leases and trusts, by people who understood that the surest fortune isn't the one you earn fast. It's the one you hold slowly and refuse to sell. The Duke of Westminster didn't get rich. His family got rich 300 years ago and then got very, very good at staying that way. So, 300 acres of what was once swamp, around £10 billion, one 12-year-old heiress, one wedding in 1677, and a single golden rule: lease, don't sell. Hold, don't spend, that turned muddy fields into the most valuable ground in the world. And a man you'd never recognize in the street, quietly sitting at the top of it all. Next time you walk past a Grosvenor Square, or a Belgrave Mews, or an Eaton Place, you'll know exactly whose name that is, and exactly how old, and how clever the money behind it really is. If you enjoyed this one, you'll love our deep dive into the rare cars hidden in the Royal Garage. It's on the screen now. Go and have a watch. Give this a like, subscribe for a proper British story every week, and tell me down in the comments, Should land this valuable really be allowed to pass down, almost untouched, forever? Until next time, keep your eyes open and don't trust a label or a street sign until you've had a proper look at who's behind it. Cheers.